This is Return to Sender. She may remember if you went to the winter quarter open mic. Content warning for sexism, abortion, drug use, feminism, sexual themes, and genocide. Estes Park, Colorado, December 20th, 2022. 2020. Although the hands I write this account with may appear clean, face fair and even and smooth, the inside is broken beyond repair. My insides are black like the outsides of a housefly. I'm going to die very soon. My name is Harvey Carter. I've lived secluded for many years, but you may know me if you've studied for any length of time the history of email technology in its infancy. Those who will read this before most are leading journalists beholden to major news outlets, only the most widely read in the entire world. However, I doubt the prevalence of belief in my account. I will be understood by nearly all to be mad, save for the few who are mad themselves. I may be terribly ill, hardly even able to walk without assistance, but my mind is clear. My confidence in my own actions lives in greater strength in this ailing flesh. Had I been less confident in my ability to discern between fiction and truth, would I not have given this account to the lowest dredges of conspiracy theory culture? Consider the implicit nature of my confidence and know that I'm right. I attended Henniker College from 1967 to 1971 before pursuing graduate studies at University of Washington. My time spent at Henniker was spent squarely in the era during which computer communication was hardly fetal. As such, I was able to study abroad. Ergo, I was able to cut my teeth in defining new technologies, all in league with some big names. I will spare them unnamed for now, as to save them from the humiliation they will likely endure once the world reads my letter. They are great men, and I wouldn't wish that burden upon them. However, you, dear reader, with your amazing modern email, intuitive graphic displays, smooth high-res text, you being made privy to it all by a feeble HDMI, please note that the very genetic bones set within that program likely had sweet beginnings in the arms of yours truly. What I loved most about Henniker College was the combination of its advanced computer facilities and its geographical isolation. The connection to nature is a commonality of all of Earth's fittest thinkers. I would later come to lament through my time at University of Washington that a great many central areas for the advancement of this beauty called technology were corrupted by themselves being central. The rot of the inner city was awfully close to this hotbed of innovation, and it wore on the fortitude of my soul, a quandary I was entrenched in on a personal level until the changes to city life, resultant of the Reagan administration, brought some semblance of a non-bohemian decency. I offer no comment as the goings-on at Henniker College after my time there, especially its most recent years amid talks of potential shutdown. Although I will admit that I was integral to the formation of Morbus Ordo Contra Pestis, which continued to operate between my graduation and only very recently. In case you haven't been watching the news, they've come to ruin since early 2019, when a student escaped their grip, destroying a great deal of their property while he was at it. Enough of the order's clergymen died that night to leave only a few frightened Greek life pissants for trial. I still often think about the ceremony we held in the tunnels, the fasting, the brotherhood, the shared admiration for the binding truth of Arians. My troubles began in 1970 with a woman, as they tend to. Her name was Stella Ferdinand, and she was once beautiful. When she had fled from the area of Henniker without indication, an action which I later learned was in vain pursuit of an abortion, that I most certainly would never have allowed, my chest burned with a burden that I knew I would need to rip out with my bare hands and fully divest. It was during one of these many aggrieved moments, late nights in the computer laboratories, primitive screens in front of me, that my troubles were given a cure called Sender. The early texts written for Morbus Ordo Contra Pestis made heavy reference to a presence that we had named Sender. This was brought into our scripture by an associate who had recounted a psychedelic experience which called attention to this being, whom this associate had read of an ancient text from various civilizations. Sender had enjoyed heralding to humans its sway over life and death. Specifically, the ability to vanquish your enemies from afar was commonplace in folklore, though the iteration unique to the books of Novus Ordo Contra Pestis had an element of forcible dissolution of self. Essentially, the scripture implied that in some futuristic situation in which all governmental stones are aligned to allow for Nos Ordo's supreme rule, our grandest of clerics would be granted, say, to send their enemies into the utmost suicidal chaos. As you might imagine, feasts were had, wine was spilled, and skin was painted many evenings in the name of Sender, and we would come back up to the surface without our robes and back to wearing our fraternally studious demeanors, as if the prior 6 hours had never occurred. This entire night, during which I was bent over a computer screen, later than was usual, my burden was so palpable to me that I could feel the need to take it into my own hands. Something had to be done to stop this, and I would be remiss not to clarify one particularity. This was never about saving the child. Not once did I consider her decisions as murderous. I have never cared about the child. I would have seen that child to any fate, death or life, even when its poor mother lay rotting. Instead, my actions were reactive to her contradiction to me. I was insulted that she would defy my technological brilliance and my virile seed. Ugly fucking bitch, I thought. Ugly fucking bitch. Beside my monitor was a massive oscilloscope unit. To this day, I'm uncertain as to why this system even had an oscilloscope display. Its use would not be apparent to me until later in the night. I had finished a vital clause of code when the clock struck 11:35 p.m. on Friday, February 20th, 1970. In the second which followed, I was startled by the sudden ejection of a cable connecting 2 systems. Mind you, computing systems beyond home use were much more visibly systems during this period. I stared down at the cable, not bending over to pick it up, and this was because I was still trying to pinpoint exactly what had removed the plug in the first place. I hadn't pulled it with my foot or my knee. I could barely even see the damn thing. At some point in building my contemptuous meat grinder of syntax on fingertips, I must have forgotten to turn on the lights as the sun went down. However, only a few seconds later, light arrived and I'd completely forgotten about the cord. And I still can't remember if I plugged it back in when I left that night, after what would ensue next. The screen lit up. It did so in a way that filled the entirety of the screen with a single letter built out of some character, like a Unicode mosaic. I could not tell what character these shapes were built with, as the rapidity of the letters required my full attention to comprehend. The room filled with spasmodic sequence of green glow, on and off in rapid fire, which gave the other blank power-down monitors a kind of deadness that you had to gaze into to get. Suddenly I wanted to escape whatever was happening, but this was easier said than done for me. To act on instinct, to peel my eyes from what was taking place before me and hurl myself through the window, disregarding the height of this building. Every second a new massive character, which filled the primitive screen, would appear, which would then disappear the following half second, thus beginning the second's rhythm. With the appearance of each character, something in the computer, it could have been the floppy disk, but I have never known for sure, would emit a loud typewriter-like clap, like a worm march of mousetraps. The first sentence completed itself. I am Sender. Would you like to meet me? And as such, my implement of destructive power was granted. However, I was unsure through what means I could answer whatever it was that was masquerading as a deity figure pulled from our fraternity Bible. And I was most horrified to even get close to the sucking void of the dark screen. I lingered. Silence grew. I was dissuaded from my hesitance to do anything as the monitor's idleness seemed to advance the black haste. I began to muster my courage by considering what I might say if I could just devise a communication mechanism. Such was the focus of my studies, after all. As if I were rehearsing an argument with myself in the mirror, I thought of my response. Yes. Are you Sender? I thought of this to myself with intense bravado, repeating it in my head, when suddenly the screen lit up again. Are you human Harvey? Hello, human Harvey. I was trembling and near pissing myself. The new message felt like a display of power. Sender seemed to be taunting me by responding to a phrase I'd only merely thought of. Was it true that my only method of communication was simple thought? Yes, I would like to see you. The oscilloscope flashed in full greenness for just a sliver of time, before coming into a shape as a wave that peaked in the middle. The vertex line of glow was shaped as such that it resembled an open eye. There I am. Can you see me? My guess as to Sender's perception seemed true. and I'll admit that at this point I was beginning to like him. I found it all somewhat amusing. I'm glad to meet you, Sender. My brotherhood brought your word into the new age, my mechanism of worship. I wasn't aware of any worship that is flattering. Indeed, since you seem to be capable of reading my thoughts, I'm going to recall the events of our most recent communion. From here, I guided Sender through an initiation meeting that was held for the arriving freshmen of the 1969-1970 school year. Catching them young, out on their own for the first time, although the yield was rarely sufficient in their cunning to fulfill the work of a cleric, we have many uses for those bred to follow. This scripture is closer to the truth than the Jahanchi texts. I had been aware that the talk of Sender had originated from ancient texts, but I was entirely unaware what it meant when it mentioned Jahanchi texts. My research even still had yielded nothing. They need not be remembered. Sender's mind wasn't mechanical exactly. He was beginning to appear to me like a thing of consciousness capable of jest. What brought you to me? If you didn't know of our worship, then why are you speaking to me? The screen hesitated, and I could see the eye on the oscilloscope wobble slightly. I can sense your longing. Could it be that Sender knew what I wanted? What I hungered for more than anything? The death of Stella Ferdinand? Was Sender born from my wish? I waited, and while I thought that I wasn't thinking with communicated intent, it was becoming more and more evident that Sender could comprehend it all the same. You have wanted something from me for a long time. Sender, what are you getting at? Do you even believe in your own scripture? In retrospect, I suppose that in a way I hadn't entirely. I believed in the figurative role of Novus Ordo Contra Pestis, but it wasn't until after this February night that I had come to embrace the metaphysical aspects. Of course. As I awaited the response, my fingers were curling up into all knuckles. The only person who knew how I felt about Stella Ferdinand, and it was God. Could he have known? Words of rejoice were brewing for me to use later. All you have to do is say go. Ugly fucking bitch. Chief wound licker in the world of men. Go. Perhaps what struck me most is how deadly it felt when the oscilloscope again filled, and possibly in full green immediately upon my completion of the forbidden thought. My very own mimetic apple of Eden. Then it was gone in a clean swipe. I waited for the green to return, and when it did, there was a lone sentence to finish it before Sender left me forever. It is done. And there I stood for a length of time I never knew. I walked back to my home after this, the night tranquil as not a soul stirred the campus or its surrounding forest zone. So too did the dorm building halls run silent, light in their oral obstinance. I slept peacefully in my bed for half the night with inoffensive dreams. However, the latter half of my rest was all the darker. I saw myself far flung to a future in which I had come to see as rule over the world as we know it. More specifically, my dream was a haunting montage of my spoils of genocidal war. Seen from below, the view of a lesser citizen born of cuckoldry of culture. I watched as this ubermensch, which was me, eviscerated the land, reaping the soil of these human crops. I sat high as I pointed my finger down to send the stolen, colonized lapdogs in a chosen direction atop my pious throne. And as such the carnage continued, so on and so forth, for centuries, until the end of time, passing along endless and nameless eras, until I resurfaced at dawn, no throne, feather pillow, like a throne so familiar and true and dreamlike. It would be another week before I would learn that the fate of Stella Ferdinand had come to pass. Word of mouth had arrived around me, and the idea I had had in mind made me imagine what I might see if I were to check the papers. Nameless horror chokes, authorities rejoice. I lied when I didn't laugh at the thought. As time wore on and the case actually hit the news, more information began to surface, of course delayed while it was bottlenecked on the desks of detectives. Ferdinand's pilgrimage had apparently been cut short by Sender's righteous blade when she had managed to make it to Bellingham. This was likely close to where her intended point B. She had exhibited increasingly strange behavior in the hours leading up to her death, which had culminated in her barricading herself inside of a hotel room for 15 hours before leaving. The car had been discovered by state police with its ass end sticking out of a small pond. While both the mother and the child, a pitiful thing which had escaped one infanticide, only to receive another, were deceased. Autopsy indicated that the child had died at least a few hours prior to the mother. Not once had I mentioned my encounter to the masses of Novus Ordo Contra Pestis, who were growing by the week. In infancy, it had been a simple amassment of maybe 20 students, and come spring of 1970, it stood to reason that we were 30% of the student body. In the following years, as is now public knowledge, we had even managed to work ourselves into the fabric of the college's infrastructure. Although my life belonged to the order, their masses had grown unruly, and I chose not to risk a sacramental reaction to my ultra-planar alliance. Years passed without incident. Perhaps I hadn't thought deeply enough about what would come after I killed my pain. But my interactions with the world would never allowed me to tell the truth again. History had never known Stella to begin with, but the omission of the truth about the burning thing that was me was a constant, no matter the subject or the audience. The lie had become me. My career would set the world on fire, but the effect paled in comparison to the vision of power I have lusted over since first sight. I never met Sender again. 50 years have passed, and I have never got another chance to communicate beyond. When I woke from my vision of carnage the morning after I killed Stella Ferdinand, I reached down and felt between my fingers that it had been a wet dream. Harvey Gardner, 2020.